we have extended our Cyber Monday sale through the week at Unregistered Academy. We now have also brand new courses just announced on Plato's Republic, Aristotle's Politics, which are both part of our new Great Books series, and courses on the New Deal and American slavery. But now you can get all of our courses and our annual memberships for 25% off in our Cyber Week sale. So go to unregisteredacademy.com and get this deal now.
This is the Unregistered Podcast, and I'm Thaddeus Russell. This is a show about ideas, people, and behaviors that are considered inappropriate, out of bounds, or beyond the pale. The things you're not supposed to talk about if you're a school teacher, a college professor, a businessman, a politician, a parent, a neighbor, or even a podcast host. These are the things you're not supposed to say or even think if you're a good liberal, a good conservative, or a good citizen. Each week, I'll interview a person who has something bad to say. They might be a journalist or a professor. They might be a porn star or a drug dealer. They might just be an ordinary person with an ordinary job who doesn't care about the rules of polite society. I'm not interested in breaking the rules just to be a troublemaker. I'm interested in people who break the rules of conventional thought and to expand the scope of what is possible to say in our society. I'm interested in people who make me think. I invited Batya Ungar-Sargon to Unregistered Chicago because I felt like we all need a good lesson in the importance of class. And that's exactly what we got. This is my interview at Unregistered Chicago with Batya Ungar-Sargon. I am in Chicago with Batya Ungar-Sargon. As I just said to the audience here, my favorite person in politics because you're actually like oddly human.
Thank you.
Which sort of took me aback at first. I don't encounter many humans in my line of work. Mostly like computers who dress as humans. Yeah. So no, you are very kind, and don't you find that politics is an unkind vocation?
Yes.
How do you feel about working in this world and being in this world and dealing with people like me?
Well, you've always been so kind to me. I think you bring the same kindness that I strive to bring. So first of all, thank you for having me.
You're welcome.
Thank you for the kind invitation. Thank you all for sitting through this. Yeah, I mean, I think, there's a sort of, famous Jewish saying that our job is not to drive out the darkness, but to bring in a little bit of light. And I think that the darker the realm that you're willing to go into to try to do that, the better you get to feel about yourself. I think the temptation to destroy is obviously very strong in me as it is in, other people in this industry. But I know how I respond emotionally to takedowns, to tear downs, to that kind of a thing, and it's never good. Like, I never think, oh, I want to be like that person who did that. I always feel really sorry for the person that they humiliated, even if they are my enemy. Like, even if it's my side that humiliated my enemy, I end up feeling sorry for my enemy. And so I think that's counterproductive because it makes you sort of see things from the other side, even when they're really wrong. And so I guess I'm very sensitive to that whole shaming thing, which is really taken hold in our political culture, in our media landscape, in, blue checkmark Twitter. That is the emotion that they most love to produce, and I just hate that. I hate being witness to that kind of cruelty. So that's a long-winded way of not answering your question, but
no. My friend Shame. It is my best friend, as a matter of fact. Come to think of it, I wake up with Shame every morning. You're looking beautiful today, Shame. Thanks for joining me again on another terrible day. My friend Chris Ryan calls himself the shame exorcist. So I I'm with you on this, and this is, I think, why we're friends. Yes, I think the use of shame is one of my least favorite aspects of really life, American culture, and especially politics, and especially nowadays with wokeness, and we're certainly going to talk about that. By the way, should we use the term woke? Because you are aware that the left doesn't use that term, right? They don't ever use that word at all.
It's kind of crazy.
It just identifies us as like right-wing tards, right? That's what we are immediately when we say that. Yeah.
Politically correct.
Yes, which I still use because I still think it's better. But yeah, politically correct.
I agree, but what term do we use?
Well, that's Batya.
How do we describe?
Help us out here. What word?
Well, okay, I think when you say it's cringe, it's like really telling, because to me, the thing that's cringe about it is that it has become a word that normies can use to describe something they don't like, which is why I love it, because it's so cringe, and I am a very cringe person. Like you will see over the course of the next hour how cringy I am, but so I love that, and I think that it's like when my book first came out, like my working class friends were kind of like, oh, what is this word woke? What does it refer to? But by now they know what it means. They know it refers to that thing that the left, they don't use the word, but they don't have another word for it because they actually really don't want to talk about the phenomenon. And so they act like, well, there's no word for it. You can't use this word. Woke just means black, right? Of course it doesn't, but so they try to make it like illegal to talk about the thing we want to talk about.
Well, what does woke mean? Let's try to define this. I'm not sure I've ever really done it. I mean, I also try to use the term identity politics instead because that's a little more precise, but even that's got its vagueness to it. So what does it mean?
Well, I mean, to say something like super pretentious, but actually wokeness, which is sort of more aligned with intersectionality, is a critique of identity politics, which they felt didn't go far enough. But so the way that I think about wokeness is, so the word woke started as black slang in the 70s and 80s to talk about something extremely important, which is state-sponsored racism, which they now call systemic racism. And I think that was really important. It's very important we talk about those things. There's still, to my mind, 4 areas left where we do not ensure Americans descended from slavery equal protections. Criminal justice, yes. We can get into this.
I don't like you anymore.
That we do know that the data shows that the police pull over Black Americans more, they insult them more, they lay hands on them more. Now that could be, Heather McDonald would argue, because they encounter them more, because there's more criminality. We can argue about that. The public school system, especially in the North, is deeply segregated. And then, of course, intergenerational poverty in certain ghettos, it just remains a huge problem that I think, if we really cared about ensuring that every American had equal access to the American dream, we would not be able to say, this is not to wash our hands of that problem. So that exists, and talking about those things used to be called, stay woke. But the way we use it now is more in line with how sociologists appropriated the term.
Wait, what ologists?
Sociologists.
Oh, sociologists. I think you said seaologists, people who study the oceans? No.
So sociologists appropriated the term to describe something else, which started around 2015, which is when they started to notice a very interesting phenomenon, that white liberals had become more extreme in their views on race than blacks and Hispanics. So they started answering questions on polls to where it became clear that they had become really, really, I don't want to say far left, because I'm as a Marxist, there's nothing to me that's left about it, but very extreme in the way they thought about race, in a way that actually Black and Hispanic Americans don't think about race. So for example, if you ask the question, do you agree or disagree with the following statement? America's institutions are so deeply racist that the only way forward is to raise them to the ground and rebuild them from the bottom up. White progressives became much more likely to say yes to that than blacks and Hispanics. So what do you call that phenomenon, right? Where they've assumed an academic lens for thinking about race in which white people have an inherent power and privilege that is baked into their DNA, it's baked into their skin color, that has like bears the brunt of American history in it, in the DNA, and that puts them at a place above people of color who are marginalized and thus morally above whites, but beneath them at some inextricable level, right? What do you call that, where you replace the difference between good and bad with who has power and who doesn't have it, and then you overlay a racial binary onto that and ascribe virtue only to the people who you think are marginalized, although they don't see themselves that way. Like, they needed a word for that. And so they took the word from Black slang that used to refer to talking about very specific things, and the sociologists started to call that the Great Awakening, right? So that's how the term shifted. And so, I mean, it's fair, I think, for Black activists to say, look, you stole our word, like that's not cool, and you stole it to criticize us. But it's a little bit more. I think that's actually a fair criticism. But now it has become a word that the right can use, or the center can use, or even liberals can use, or even leftists like me, to refer to something that is, I think, a sickness that is deeply problematic from a moral and racial point of view, and that has grown, and I'll just end with this. I think the reason it's had so much influence is, we've talked about this before, but so there's a big difference between the intelligentsia of the left and the intelligentsia of the right because of who goes to college. So if a third of Americans are going to college, and we know that universities basically are, factories for producing, liberal elites, right? So the people who graduate from that, they're going to remain much more susceptible to the bullshit of the liberal intelligentsia because they've already been to the training ground. So when they turn on MSNBC and they see a person with a PhD telling them that every Black person is marginalized and disempowered and has no agency, right? Something that's a disgusting thing to say. That person, because they had to go through a composition class taught by a PhD student who had to take a class on critical race theory in order to get their PhD, they're gonna remember that way of thinking, and they're gonna think, oh, that makes sense. Right? On the right, you don't have that because, the 2/3 of Americans who didn't go to college are increasingly conservative. They're increasingly affiliated with the Republican Party. And so the intelligentsia there on the right, there's a big disconnect there. But also, first of all, to them, this kind of way of thinking remains so alien. And then to add insult to injury, they then call them racist for not wanting to think in this way, for not wanting to assume this way of thinking. So. Another long way of not answering a question.
No, but did you say that wokeness is a sickness?
I think so, yeah.
Well, you want to say that in the microphone on camera? Because we're going to use that as a clip. Make sure you look into the microphone when you say that, into the camera when you say that. It's going to be a great clip, Batya.
Wokeness is a sickness. No, I think,
Why did you use such a term as sickness?
Okay, I'll tell you why. Because as a person who was afflicted by it, for a while.
So you were woke.
Yes. It's very hard to rid yourself of those feelings, and I still have them, and I still struggle with it. There are certain images that can still evoke woke feelings in me, and I think that they're bad, and it's very hard to unlearn it once you've learned it, like once you've learned to think that way. Like, there are images that evoke, is that what you said? Yeah. Wokeness in you? Yes. You're like a professional anti-wokeness person. I know. I have crypto. Can we talk about this a little bit? Can we talk about your career as a woke person? When was this? It's very interesting. What was your name then? So I got a PhD at Berkeley. Let's talk about this. In English literature. In English literature. Can you tell them the title of your dissertation? Can I remember the title of my dissertation? The first question. It was called Coercive Pleasures, the Force and Form of the Novel, and then there were some numbers, like 1792 to 18 something, but that it's like coercive pleasures. Yeah, it was about like nonsense. No. No, I'm gonna decode something right now. This is gonna be like the biggest thing I can give you guys. Like, okay, the reason that wokeness, the connection between wokeness and the academy is thus. Yeah. So when you get a PhD, okay, you show up, and what you're doing is you are tasked with coming up with something new about, if you're studying literature, if you're studying, let's say, that's all I know, literature, fine. You have to come up with something new about books that have existed for many, many years, right? So I was looking at the 18th century. So meaning for 300 years, people who were much smarter than me were doing nothing but reading these books and writing books about them, right? But I had to say something new, or that was the professional barrier for entry, right? So I had to make something up that was new, that could plausibly be said to have emerged from these books after people smarter than me, much smarter than me, had spent 300 years doing the same thing, right? And you can't get a job in academia if you can't do that. Meaning, like, the entire premium is placed on being original rather than being accurate, because let me tell you, when people much smarter than you have been studying books for 300 years, everything true about those books has already been said. I mean, that's just a fact. But you can't write a PhD thesis and say, oh, actually, Carlyle got this right in 1912, case closed, right? So you have to come up with something new, which means that you have to come up with something counterintuitive. Because everything that's true has already been said. Everything intuitive, everything that is actually in those books, someone else has already had an academic career based on saying that. So you can't get away with that. So the counterintuitive becomes like the currency of academia, okay? That's kind of where we're at. And I think it's probably been that way since the 70s, the 80s, like the critical theory takeover. That's how you get to a situation where Dr. King's vision that the only society worth living in is one in which we are judged by the content of our character and not the color of our skin is deemed racist for failing to respect the privilege of the marginalized. That's typical academic thinking, that counterintuitive. Oh, you thought that you were being a good American by thinking we should judge people based on their spiritual life, not their DNA. No, you are the biggest racist of all. That is the academic move. That's how you get a career in academia, right? Oh, you thought the goal was to have marriage equality for people who have different sexualities than you. No, thinking there's a difference between men and women and that gay people should be able to have protected homosexual spaces, that's the biggest transphobia of all, right? You see how that counterintuitive move, right? And Tom Wolfe called this, he was great about this in Radical Chic. I mean, this is such a great book. He really laid it out, how elites, to reproduce elite standing, what you have to do is, you don't have to distinguish yourself from the bottom, right? That's like a given, right? To be part of the elite, you have to distinguish yourself from the middle class, right? Yes. The lame, cringe, normie middle class, right? So how do you distinguish yourself from the middle class? So he called it nostalgie de la boue, which means nostalgia for the mud. And he goes back in history and he shows how, frequently when you had new elites emerging, they would develop this attachment to the criminal element, to the pedophile, to the people who it is so obvious don't deserve your pity because they are victimizing others. But there would be this intense desire to see things from their point of view. Why? Because every middle-class person thinks that criminals are bad, right? How do you distinguish yourself from the middle class? How do you distinguish yourself in America from a middle class that finally, the entire country, including the South, at 93%, have approval ratings for interracial marriage, right? America, which has struggled so much with racism, finally arriving at this place where we are struggling, where we have all agreed, where every middle class normie knows, right, that everyone should be treated with dignity and equality before the law. Well, how do you distinguish yourself from that? That becomes the most racist thing you can say. How dare you want to live in a colorblind society, right? Nostalgie de la boue. That's how they distinguish themselves from the middle class to really elevate themselves into the elites. That's the theory.
I think I want to push back a little bit.
Okay.
Because it sounds like you're saying that what's known as common sense, among most Americans, the middle class, right, should be accepted and shouldn't be challenged, shouldn't be questioned. I mean, that's to me what being an academic is. If you have any quality at all to your mind, it is to look at what is considered to be common sense, what people don't question, what people just walk around assuming to be true, and ask questions about it. Now, the conclusions they have come up with, you and I agree, right, on most of that it's mostly terrible in many ways, and you haven't even mentioned some of the ways in which it's terrible. But I do want to defend intellectualism, which is what I'm talking about here, right, which is simply like, it's an orientation to the world in which one is always questioning and skeptical. To me, that's, and just a curiosity about ideas, right, that's relentless, that will go anywhere, and is wants to go anywhere, and ask any question. So, but especially, Barry Weiss calling her thing common sense. Is that that's the name of her outlet? Yeah, that very much bothers me. I mean, that's sort of saying that what people accept to be true normally, we should accept as well. That's not what I'm about. Never been about that. And I have heard people sort of on our side of the media, sort of the dissonant wing, whatever we want to call it, use that term a lot, common sense. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's exactly why I started reading books, is because I didn't want to accept what people around me were saying. Or at least I wanted to ask questions about it. Sometimes I accepted it, sometimes I didn't. But don't you want to at least hold out some hope for what intellectuals should be doing?
I am perfectly happy for universities to exist. I'm not happy for the mindset that rules the humanities right now to become the kind of ruling, both lingua franca, but also to seep into legislation, because that in a democracy is meant to reflect the will of the people, and that's not where they're at. And there's actually right now a very inspiring backlash from the normie culture coming, which is very cool. So we're seeing where real power lies in America, and it's with the average voter. So I'm very happy for those spaces to exist, but I'm not happy for them to have control, because I mean, would you say that the words skeptical, curious, and questioning are words you would ascribe to the university today?
Did I mention the word university? I think I said intellectual. Like, so I'm fuck universities. Are you kidding me? Like, what am I doing here? Unregistered academy, it's the anti-university. No, I hate universities. I'm more famous for that than most people, right? No, intellectualism is what I'm defending, which I don't find in universities. In fact, I think universities today are largely anti-intellectual, right? I mean, you said that they promote people who are innovative, or who are counterintuitive, and I think that's partly true, but I think they're also interested in promoting people who hew to the discourse, who stay in line and say maybe they change the discourse a half an inch, but they're basically in line on all the fundamental questions. Pat, over here in the back, he went to the University of Chicago a long time ago, and he said it's changed so much he's not sure he wants to send his daughter there. And one of the reasons is that, 2 years ago, I'm sure you know about this, the English department at the University of Chicago announced that they would only hire scholars who...
PhD candidates who were only if they were interested in black studies.
Oh, admissions. This was
this was admissions of graduate students.
Graduate admissions.
Graduate admissions. So it wasn't undergraduates coming into the program.
Even worse than I thought.
Yes,
wow.
Graduate students only if they would study black studies.
So they said they would only admit graduate students who do black studies. Yeah. So, I mean, talk about enforcing conformity to a particular narrative, right? So the thing that I see, one of the things I see going on in academia is this production of victims to talk about, to valorize, to celebrate, to defend, to theorize about. It's an addiction, I see it. I mean, they need victims, and usually the victim is black, but not always, but often. Now trans people are their favorite victims. If you can find a black trans person, then you've hit the trifecta. But
especially if they're disabled.
And if they're disabled, yeah, that's asking too much, Pat. So why is that? Why do and by the way, almost everyone I went to graduate school with at Columbia was not middle class. They were wealthy. They were from very wealthy families. I think 2 of us did not go to an elite college out of my class of 23 at Columbia. So what is it about producing victims that's so important to your typical professor? I don't exactly know the answer, that's why I'm asking you.
Well, the argument I made in the book is that it's a distraction from the ways in which the liberal elite have benefited from income inequality and the class divide.
Oh, yeah. So this is where Batya really kills it, I think. And this is, your work on this, I think, just explodes so many of the myths about who the left is and what progressivism is. So talk about that. How has, I mean, this is the theme of your book, of course. How has wokeness actually, it's interesting because the woke, which is usually white people, right, talk about how they talk about it as if they're being so selfless. They're Jesus figures, right? They're martyrs for this cause. They're here to help black people and poor people and women and trans people, et cetera. But your argument in your book is that, as a matter of fact, it was quite selfish of them. These woke ideas and woke policies have actually benefited the middle and upper classes, and especially the upper classes. Can you just do that argument right now? Because I think people will be very impressed by it.
So, it used to be that you had, two parties in America, right? You had the Republicans, which was like the party of the rich, and then you had the Democrats, who were the party of labor, of the working class. It was like, that was sort of the commonsensical, way of thinking about things. I think it was pretty accurate. Membership in labor unions was extremely high. Michael Lind talks about this a lot. There was a lot more of a pluralist approach to politics because a politician's success relied on these membership groups where the members had a lot of input and a lot of say. But starting with, so in the 70s, you had the sort of the beginning of the wage stagnation of the working class. Mm-hmm. And then, Bill Clinton showed up with NAFTA, globalization, the destruction of the American working class by Democrats, because he thought, well, if I embrace that sort of free market approach of the right, we'll have a sort of ruling majority because we'll get all of these moderates. Plus, everybody knows that trade and immigration, GDP goes up with them, right? Which is obviously true. GDP goes up when you have, slave laborers coming into the country working for corporations, right? Because then their profits go up, so GDP goes up. Nobody ever asks, goes up for who, Mm-hmm. Nobody ever asks who is benefiting from this and who is paying for it. Of course, the elites are benefiting from things like trade and immigration, and the working class is paying for it. But the Democrats, because they started to, there was a shift, they started to sort of throw their lot in with the college educated, with these elites who are consumers of goods and consumers of slave labor in the form of domestic servants and, landscapers, and they like to go to nice restaurants.
Not quite slave labor.
Not quite slave labor. But
very poorly paid labor.
And unprotected, crucially.
Yeah.
It's not just the money, but it's that there's no protections. Right?
So legal protections.
Exactly.
Yeah.
To compete with American workers. So Democrats started to see their future as being part of a coalition of highly educated elites and the very poor. Right? And their view now is basically that those should kind of meet, right? They'll stay in their elite spot, right? They'll become, rich, educated, coastal dwellers, right? And then everybody else beneath them, there won't be any upward mobility, but there'll be universal basic income, right? We'll pay off the working class not to work, right? We'll just give everybody, $2,000 a month per person, and then we'll import all of Venezuela to do the menial work that we actually all rely on to survive. Mm-hmm. That's sort of the model today. They lost the working class, and as they did, they wrote books like, "What's the matter with Kansas? Why are these people voting against their economic interests? We're happy to give them welfare." They cannot even conceive that working class Americans don't want welfare. They want the dignity of good jobs that pay a living wage. That way of thinking, the value of autonomy, they call that bootstrapping, right? They don't understand that working class Americans want to work for what they get and to be able to support their families. So the right's not much better. Before Trump, right, they were sort of totally catering to the top with all this trickle-down free market crap. I don't know where you guys are on
they
that.
Love it.
Oh, they love it, right. I don't love it.
You'll be fine.
I thought Trump was great on economics. I thought he really cared about I don't know if he really cared at an emotional level, but it was very clear that the policies he was enacting very much directly helped the working class. They made them feel seen. There were wage increases, unprecedented. He got rid of NAFTA. He did a lot of things Bernie Sanders had promised he would do in 2016. Trade war with China, tariffs. So So there was this shift where the working class suddenly started voting for Republicans, and the Democrats sort of wrote them off as racists and created this new coalition between the sort of educated elites and the poor. But they didn't want to admit that. I mean, who wants to admit that we're the party of the elites? So instead of, what they did was they shifted the rhetoric. When I say they, I know it sounds conspiratorial. I don't mean it like that. I actually think like AOC is a deeply sincere person, like a cringy sincere person who believes everything she says. They do believe it, but in effect, what they did was they changed the rhetoric from talking about class and labor to talking about race and gender. Created a new victimology that enabled them to ignore the fact that it was their policies that had sold out the working class. And then, there was this whole, remember the whole language of everyone will learn to code, right? They created an economy that works really, really well. If you're one of them, if you're in the knowledge industry, if you have that college degree, if you can code, they created an entire economy that worked really well for them, that skyrocketed their fortunes. I mean, 50 years ago, a college professor didn't make $130,000 a year, They lived in a working class neighborhood and made maybe a little bit more than their neighbor, the plumber, right? Today, it's just... You can't. The median income is, between $45,000 and $55,000 a year, and journalists make north of 100. All of the elites, who determine the conversation, they're in the top 10% at this point. So, but they didn't want to talk about that, and so they shifted the conversation to the things they could control, because they looked at the Republican Party and they're they're still very white, they're still not talking to Black Americans. We can, we'll use that, and so they leaned into this identity politics, which was a way of, I don't think intentionally, but did obscure the way in which leftist elites had benefited from income inequality, which was something that was very uncomfortable for them to talk about. And so much of what we see now is just their attempt to obfuscate that. The conversation around student loan forgiveness is such a great example. All of these elites are about to get $20,000 paid for by their cleaning ladies, and they're still, just watch the way they talk about this. 90% of it's going to go to people making under $75,000 a year. It's first of all, okay, you're a journalist. You're just taking the administration's word for that. That is not your job. Your job is to question that, ask for a single piece of evidence, but also, okay, $75,000 a year. I think most of us if somebody's making under that and paying $2,000 a month in student loans, that seems unfair. Why didn't you cap it at 75 if you knew that was the number you were going to be able to defend to the public? No, they capped it at 125, $250 for a family, $250,000 for a family, right? That tells you everything you need to know. They go out and brag about the thing they didn't do. Right? So there's a lot of that, this kind of false consciousness going on.
Can I explain the student loan issue to you?
Yes, please.
Okay, because I don't think you understand it. So the thing is that people like me and you, we need to go to college to learn the truth about how Black people should live. And by doing, then we can, wait, hold on, would you please? So, and then once we learn the truth about how they should live, then we can go tell them how they should, but we can't see the thing, Batya, we can't do that unless we go to college. Now, I understand that those poor Black people will be ending up paying for our college education, but you see how it works in their favor at the end, right?
Right. It's trickle-down economics leftist edition.
That's actually what's happening. I think that's actually what's going on in people's minds underneath the top layer. I mean, because that's the only way you can explain it. We must go to college so that we can save everyone else. So you have to pay for it, right? You have to pay for us to save you. Yeah. It's like tributary colonialism or something. I don't know. It's like the people we conquer and colonize, they have to pay us for that. So.
Right. And then when you ask Black Americans, what do you need? They say good jobs, lower inflation, and an end to crime. And so the Democrats look at them and go, great, we'll give ourselves student loan forgiveness, right? That's their
No, the answer, the Democrats say, did you know how many trans sex workers were killed last year? That's the crime problem for Democrats, I think. So I have been saying for a while, and I think I might have said this to you, that to me what's basically going on in American politics for the last 6 to 7 years is a civil war between those who went to college and those who didn't. But more specifically, those who are of college, they speak the language of colleges and universities, and those who are not of that culture, right? People who may have gone to community colleges or may have gone to some big state school and majored in business perhaps, but generally it's people who just simply aren't a part of that discourse that's been created in the academy that created you and me over the last 30 to 40 years, right? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I agree, yeah.
Yeah. Now, speaking of academia, you, I think, used the term Marxist in describing yourself earlier, just about half an hour ago, right? We haven't talked about this. Are you a Marxist? We had a Marxist in yesterday.
Well, I'm a Marxist the way Trump was. Like, I'm obviously like...
Oh.
I'm a Trump socialist.
You're a Trump socialist?
Yeah.
Oh, are you a Jackson Hinkle's thing, MAGA communism? Are you a MAGA communist? Do you know about Jackson Hinkle's MAGA communism? He's trying to start a movement bringing together Trump supporters and communists. And it's going great, apparently. But actually, Steve Bannon uses the term working class in every sentence practically. I don't know if you guys watch The War Room, but that's what he does. And a lot of the Trump people use that term, which liberals have not used since the 1930s. I mean, they don't talk about the working class anymore. They got rid of their Marxism in the 1950s. Actually, Curtis and I will talk about this later, about the relationship between progressivism and the left, the communist left, which I think is interesting. But I do know that at least in terms of discourse, whether they're actually secret communists or not, they have not used terms like working class or even socialism. But the MAGA folks are very comfortable with class analysis, at least on that level.
Yeah, they're all Marxists.
You think they're all Marxists? But do they want a working class revolution?
No, I mean, no, that's why I sort of I should probably stop using that term. Like, there's a lot of ways in which it doesn't quite fit for me. I'm religious, obviously. Marx is famously not a fan.
And is Donald Trump a worker?
I wouldn't say he's a worker, but I would
Wouldn't
say
he's a worker? He was
I would
born
say
to a rich man, and he then became his own rich man.
I would say his everything he did was class-based.
Yeah.
From the First Step Act that released 5,000 black men from prison to, getting rid of NAFTA and signing into law the most pro-labor trade deal the United States has ever signed, to, mention tariffs, trade war with China, subsidies to farmers. Like everything he did, was, aside from foreign policy stuff, was class-based. Was much of what Biden has done, but for a different class, right? Like what he's been doing has been benefiting a different class. So to me, saying I'm a Marxist means like class first. Like the class divide is the big unspoken divide, the destruction of the American working class, the American male as the provider. This is bad news, and it was done by liberals and leftists, and they need to turn the boat around. And meanwhile, they're not. They're leaning into the elites, and it's the right that seems to be picking up the mantle. And for a long time, Fox News represented, the cultural interests of the working class, but not their economic interests. But post-Trump, I mean, the left really wants you to believe that the divide in the GOP is over, like, January 6th or election denial. Like, it's not. It's over trade. It's over immigration. It's over economics. And the thing Trump introduced was a very, through Bannon, a populist economic agenda, the likes of which we haven't seen since, for generations.
1930s, there were some sort of right-wing populists like Huey Long. So I was thinking as you were talking, I mean, the top level of the Democratic liberal leadership, they're mad at Trump about the trade deals because they want to protect their globalist empire, right? They want to keep establishing relationships or maintaining relationships with things like this Chinese Communist Party and Western Europe and NATO and the EU and all that. They hate Trump for that, right? The ones who know stuff, about politics and trade deals. Rank and file Democrats who watch MSNBC don't even know about that stuff. They're not even aware that he passed these deals or did anything, right? They hate him because he is working class. Not, of course, economically or financially, he's not, but culturally.
Aesthetically, yeah, for
he's
sure.
super working class, and I think the elite Dems have shown the rank and file Dems, there's the bad guy. He's the kind of person, if he didn't have money, who would shop at Walmart. Of course, we are on the side of the people who work and shop at Walmart. We just really don't like that they shop there. It is, I think, that American elite liberal politics is profoundly culturally elitist in that way, and basically it comes down to aesthetics.
Yeah.
I think black people are awesome accessories to have around the house, I mean, like figuratively speaking, to have a black friend is awesome, but that's hard to come by if you're a white liberal. So they like to just use like pictures, of George Floyd or just the Black Lives Matter to show that you're down. It became part of, I think, respectability, like to be a respectable American citizen for the liberals over the last 10 to 20 years, or actually since World War II, they added in anti-racism as one of the things you must be to be a respectable American. But they don't think past that. It's just something that's taken as a given. You must be an anti-racist, and you must have fond things to say about black people only.
So we could agree on how lame that is and disgusting and despicable, but the right bears a huge moral responsibility to show up and why is it okay for them to be we're going to make fun of how they treat this community, but we're not going to step up and show up and campaign there and provide alternatives? That bothers me a lot. They should be getting 30% of the black vote by now easily, and they're not. And that is a moral crime. I mean, that's not okay. We can make fun of I'm on board with all that. Yeah, it's gross. I spent a lot of time in that milieu till they kicked me out, and it's disgusting, and black people know it. I remember I was telling a friend of mine about the Yale study. Do you guys know about the 2018 Yale study?
This is the best single statistic I've ever heard from you.
It's great. So what they found was that there's a difference between how white liberals and white conservatives talk to blacks and Hispanics, right? And they found that conservatives, white conservatives talk to other conservatives. When white conservatives talk to white people and when they talk to black people or Hispanic people, there's no difference in how they talk. But when you have white liberals, they present lower competency when they're speaking to blacks and Hispanics. They dumb down their vocabulary. Yes, consistently. And Yale is not some conservative, right?
They're just making sure that the black people can understand them.
So that's wokeness.
What's wrong with that, Batya?
It's the presumption that the person is dumber than you, less educated than you, has less power than you, needs your beneficence. An unconscious switch based on the color of someone's skin, right? It's appalling. It's just appalling. But meanwhile, those conservatives are not showing up and being normal. They've ceded the ground. And I think, I know where I was going with that. I told my friend that, and she was like, Batya, we all know that. She's black. She was like, we all know that. That's not something that's lost on them, that, But where's the right? Where is the right providing alternatives?
Well, I mean, so when you say the right and conservatives, you mean the establishment Republican right, not the MAGA right? Because the MAGA, Bannon and company are very interested in getting black. I don't know what he's doing, but he's talking a lot, and he has lots of black people on his show, and I certainly know he wants black votes, and I think he knows that he can get them, and he's very keen on that. So who are you talking about when you're saying conservatives don't reach out to black people?
I'm looking at the polls. I'm saying, 20% of black men. Okay, that's good, but
voted for Trump.
Voted for Trump. No, 18% voted for Trump. Now it's up to 20%.
Yeah, are pro-Trump. 20% of black men support Trump. Yeah.
But it's amazing. It should be higher. I mean, it's school choice is something that's very important to that community.
But but hang on a second. Just take those. Think about that. What has been said about Donald Trump and race and black people over the last 6 to 7 years, and 20% of black men in this country will vote for him? That means there is something wrong in the official discourse. It's not getting through because the number of Americans who read the news at all is pretty low. The number of Americans who have any political sophistication at all is quite low. So for 20% of a group to support one candidate means that, are you taking it that those 20% of black men have read the news and they see Donald Trump and they understand that he is working in their interest?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I think a lot of them were probably released from prison by him and put in prison by Joe Biden. So, that's not going to be a hard choice, right? We ran an op-ed by somebody like that at Newsweek who was put in prison by Joe Biden, released by the First Step Act. And he was it's not like it was a choice for me. It was there's one person who gave me my freedom and one person who took it
How many
away.
people got out because of the First Step Act?
At this point, I think it's 5,000 black men. I don't know how many beyond that, but...
There's the 20% right there. Yeah. There aren't that many, are there? So let's talk about the right. So you've been in this terrible sort of situation, which I sort of was in too, which is that the left won't talk to you, liberals won't talk to you.
Right.
And so the only outlets you can go on are basically right-wing outlets, right? And you've made a lot of right-wing friends over the years. Now, a Berkeley PhD, former woke person, now you're dealing with, people like Steve Bannon. how's that been, and what do you want to do about it, and what are you afraid of with them taking power next month?
Well, the thing that's bad about it is, like, I hate preaching to the choir. I just hate it. So it's like, I know my message is popular because it's a critique of the left, but I can't stand. I always end up like even now, I'm like saying things that I wouldn't say if I was talking to a leftist, but being like, well, where is the right? You know, like, I'd be saying like, you leftists, right? Like, because you feel the need to, like, you want to kind of have a balanced approach. And there are certain topics where I know I'm so much less effective talking to the right because they already know it. You know what I mean? Like, if you're, you know, I don't have to tell a working class audience like that the working class has been abandoned, you know, like, but the left won't, they don't want to hear it, you know, because the things I'm worried about on the right are, you know, there's certain, it just, sometimes it goes too far, and it goes too far in the exact ways that the left accuses them of.
Oh,
so
too far in which direction?
Like, I think that the right now represents, there's a big moral majority happening. So, for example, with Governor DeSantis's, you know, quote unquote, "Don't Say Gay" bill, that had 56% support among Democrats. Okay, so he had like 90% of Republicans loved that bill, and 56% of Democrats. That's a mandate, right? That's where the nation is, you know? If you ask Americans, you know, how many of you think transgender Americans should have protections from discrimination in the workforce and in housing, 64% will say, yes, they need protections. If you say, should they be allowed to compete on, you know, teams of, like, should Leah Thomas be allowed to compete on a women's team, that drops to 19%, right? So America is at that, the normie average voter is being represented in the correct moral position by the right. So why do they have to go so far on certain things where they could just stand right there and, like, so that the divisiveness, there's a resurgence of racial thinking on the far right that is not, it's not deplored enough, it's not called out enough. Like, there is a segment of the far right that is not on board with Dr. King's vision, that is talking about physiognomy again, you know, and where did that come from? I mean, it's very elite imposed, but, you know, that stuff, you know, does filter down. I'm very worried about that, and I don't think it has the kind of power that the elites on the right have. I think it is circumscribed, but I don't like it, and I see it. I don't think the groomer language is good. I think that that's very close to something that was very bad, which is when they used to call gay people pedophiles to smear them. Like, it's, you know, why go so far? You have the moral mandate. So I think, to me, those are the things I'm really worried about. And of course, like, you know, I really don't want to see that free market stuff coming back. Like, I want the MAGA economic platform to because I think there also you have a real moral majority on those things too.
Yeah, I said to you before we started rolling here that I in the first time in my life, and I've been around a long time actually, I think I am seeing the first rise in real racism. This is based on, you know, being on Twitter and sort of being around a lot of conservatives and right-wingers and being acquainted with Frog Twitter, but it's not just Frog Twitter. It is people, broadly speaking, sort of who are conservative, who are now feeling, I think, some license to say things that are clearly racist. I mean, in the good old scientific 19th century sense,
yeah.
You know. And I think there's a lot of causes for that. I think one is just the suppression of that kind of thinking, that kind of speech. If you suppress that for decades, generations, people, of course, are going to do what? You know, I mean, Freud said it will be the return of the repressed, and it'll come back even worse. If you tell people, you can't be racist, you can't be racist, you can't be racist, they're going to end up being even worse racists, I think. There's that. I think the videos, I have seen an incredible number just recently in the last, 6 months. I'm sure you all have too. Lots of videos circulating around online of black people acting very poorly. Lots of violence in the streets all around the country, and you don't see videos of white people doing that. Lots of, gang group violence, mob beatdowns and stuff like that. World star hip hop videos, you know what I'm talking about? It's not good. And now, That's all really happening, though. So we can also talk about black culture, and I'm here for that always. I started my career talking about that, and that's why I got fired from academia. But I do think whatever the case is, whatever the cause is, I do think that's happening, and I've never seen that in my lifetime, and I don't know where that's going to go. But it is starting to look like the beginnings of a race war out there.
I have seen less of it. I disagree a little bit with your analysis of where it's coming from. I don't think it's coming from people saying you can't be racist, because I think everyone agrees, most people agree with that. I think it comes from the you're not allowed to talk about what you're seeing with your own eyes. Like when you tell people that, they're going to rebel against that, as they should. And the re-racialization of American society by liberal elites. So suddenly, 20 years ago, people just didn't think in such starkly racial terms, but that's been brought back by leftist elites. I think I talk of civil war, talk of race war. I never feel, I could be totally wrong. I'm a very bad prognosticator. I'm wrong about a lot of things, but I just feel that America has reached a place on that where people want to see themselves as past that. They want to see themselves as having overcome that. In fact, despite what everybody will tell you on the left, there's new data out there about what Americans want their children to be taught in schools, and there's almost no difference between Democrats and Republicans on whether they want their kids to be taught about slavery and discrimination and Jim Crow. It's over 90% for both. So that is all a lie. Like when they say they don't want critical race theory, they mean they don't want you to learn about slavery and the ugly history of America. That's all bullshit. Like that's not true at all. Bullshit. So to me, it's like those people are not. They want the right to say, look at these kids behaving badly, and they feel that they don't have the right to say that. I also don't know if there aren't mobs of white people doing that stuff too, and it's just not getting circulated because the people who circulate those things tend to be, right wing. Although one imagines if there was video of that, the left would be only too happy to circulate it, right? But I don't feel worried about that. I think if you get out into America and you talk to average Americans, they want to see this as behind them, whether they're black Americans or white Americans. And you see a lot of, black people, decrying these behaviors. And
sure.
So I just feel a little bit like it's, I too have seen many of those videos, but they make up a very teeny tiny proportion of the community that those kids are from. I think that's really important to keep in mind.
I'm not saying they're an accurate representation of what's going on.
And I think
but they're a representation of something that's going on. But that's not even what I was talking about. I was simply talking about how they're perceived, and I'm sure that they're being perceived in ways that are not going to be helpful.
Right. I think what they are actually probably a representation of is a kind of lax attitude towards them in the Democratic-led cities.
Well, there's that. Yeah.
That these take place in
right.
is probably what's happening there. There is a feeling that, a kind of hands-off feeling. I talk to cops a lot, and they feel very hampered in their ability to do their jobs in the post-George Floyd world. So obviously they should feel hampered in their ability to abuse people. That's good, but there's also been a very bad the Ferguson effect, where they feel uncomfortable. There was a situation in New York the other day where there were these guys on ATVs, is that what they're called?
Yeah.
Doing donuts, and the police came and started to chase them, and the two guys drove into a pillar and died. And the cops were placed on administrative leave. And so one of them said to me, what am I supposed to do next time I see that? You think I'm going to chase them down next time I see that? Like, they punish the guys who were trying to enforce the rule of law. So that kind of thing, I think, probably has a huge impact on what we're seeing as well.
Yeah, for sure. Now, you have presented an incredible amount of information in your book, your articles, on my podcast today, that the vast majority of Americans are not woke, even though we're not supposed to use that term. What percentage of Americans do you think, I mean, you're going to guess, but like...
No, I actually know.
Are woke.
Yeah, I know.
What's the percentage?
It's 6%.
You got a number? 6?
Yeah.
That's a survey? How do we know this?
Yeah. Well, Pew did a study where they broke down America into like different tribes based on the questions they asked. So the progressive category, how did you get into the progressive category? There was a bunch of questions, and one of them was that question I said before. Do you believe that America's institutions are so deeply racist that the only way forward is to raise them all to the ground and rebuild them from the bottom up? That's like the classic woke question,
sure.
Right?
Okay.
So over 91% of people who were in the progressive camp said yes to that. So that we know that's who the wokes are, right? But we also know more about the progressive camp based on other things. So we know they're the whitest of all of the Democrats Democrat subgroup. They're the most highly educated. They're tied for the most affluent. They're 6% of Americans. And guess how many black Americans are in that progressive woke group? It's also 6%.
Oh, yeah?
Yes, just 6% of black Americans have those kind of woke views that you would.
So 6% of Americans are woke. Now, the theme this weekend here has been democracy. We've been talking about democracy a lot. So it sounds to me like if only 6% of Americans have these terrible ideas that none of us like, the more democracy we have, the less that politics will be powerful.
Yes, correct.
That's correct. Okay. I think we're going to talk to Curtis Yarvin about that in half an hour. Sorry, no, an hour and a half, because I think he'll have a lot to say about that. But I'm curious about that. How will we make this country more democratic to achieve that end?
This country's very democratic.
Is it?
Is it not?
There's a whole bunch of arguments that it's not.
I don't know. The other day, my husband said to me, isn't the fact that Donald Trump won like a total evisceration of your theory about, the idea that the working class has been dispossessed? And I was like, yeah, it was the return of the repressed. Like, in the end, democracy wins. Like, in the end, people have their say. I think this is like a pretty amazing country. It is. I mean, there's so much democracy happening, and even the things that Democrats say are like anti-democratic. Like, if you think about it, like, okay, I don't know where you guys are on January 6th, but to me, it seemed like Donald Trump really didn't want to leave office and tried to get a lot of people to storm, the Capitol to prevent that from happening. And, with all of his efforts, he managed to get a whopping 700 people to show up and commit minor trespassing crimes
with no guns, which I thought was an odd choice for an insurrection.
Exactly. What a coup for democracy.
I didn't know they were all Gandhians. They wanted a non-violent insurrection, the first one. Yeah, that's cool. A non-violent coup.
It was pretty impressive. I thought.
Okay, so Donald Trump is a true expression of the public will. You're saying?
He's a tribute. It's politicians, their power comes from
the people want him.
The votes that were put into them.
Donald Trump was a democratic phenomenon.
For sure.
Yeah.
Like Brexit.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right. And the fact that he had no corporate backing, no Wall Street backing, the media, of course, was completely against him. All the institutions were against him, and he still won, is pretty powerful evidence that this is a democratic country.
That's how I feel.
I like it. Are you ready to take some questions?
Sure.
Okay, cool. Think hard. Curtis Yarvin, first question.
Okay. I just was going to comment on what was just said, which is that I think there's a crucial thing there. If you think the election of Donald Trump, represents democracy in this country, I have a simple way to make the country 1,000 times more democratic, which is that you could give Donald Trump 1,000 times more power over the executive branch. Absolutely. And if you can make anything 1,000 times more X, it must not be very X.
Well, I mean, so I guess you're not so into the Founding Fathers' vision of. I guess you're not so into the Founding Fathers' vision of balance of power and having the minority have some kind of.
Spoiler alert. We will certainly get into this very soon. James.
So I want to clear the record. Thad has spent his entire career as a coastal academic, even if he's pretending that he's not an academic now.
He's charged.
And so when he portrays the people in this room and our economic views, what he's actually saying is that the people at Reason and Cato, and your friend Robbie Suave probably, are all into NATO and trickle-down economics and stuff. But the people in this room and the bulk of the free market people in America recognize that things like NATO are actually managed trade. It has nothing to do with free trade. It has nothing to do with the free. NAFTA, thank you. It has nothing to do with a free market.
NATO too.
NATO too. So when you're creating favored nations and when you're creating winners and losers in the economy, bailing out this bank, letting this bank fail, buying this auto industry company, etc., you're distorting the market in such a drastic manner that the consequences of your actions are completely unknowable. And so I think that between actual free marketeers, not the people who Thad represents, misrepresents in this room, but real people who believe in free markets and Marxists such as yourself who haven't gone like the woke direction have a lot more in common than we think, and especially now with woke capital, so to speak. A lot more people, like in the libertarian set, for want of a better term, have kind of come around to the notion that corporations are also agents of the state. Right. So I guess I don't really have a question, but I would love to hear if you have noticed anything like that in your experience as a journalist or whatever.
Awesome question.
Yeah, I think that I see, more in common between myself and libertarians than I would have 5 years ago or 10 years ago, and that critique I think is salient. I think my problem is like, I think for purposes of democracy, like we have a responsibility to create a market that works in a certain way. And I think you and I would never be able to agree about that, because I think like left to their own devices, I'm not convinced that if corporations were not so heavily invested in by the state with the state, that if the state in America was less involved, that things would be better for the working class. I just feel like very unconvinced by that, and I think that like even small things could really help. And I do respect a free market. I think capitalism is extremely important. I think you cannot look at the history of the world and not conclude that like prosperity for the most is inherently tied to a certain level of freedom around trade. And it pains me to say, when I look at China and I see Xi Jinping doing things I would have said, this kind of bringing socialism back, bringing his capitalism to heel with more socialism, it pains me to admit that it's obviously hurting the economy, which is obviously going to hurt, people at the bottom as well. It's just that here it seems to me like we had a model that was working much better in the 70s, and it was working better for everybody. Like even though people at the top had, I don't begrudge billionaires. I think that's a really interesting phenomenon as well. Most working class people that I talk to, they don't hate the rich.
Exactly.
They see them as like, they're aspirational, and they see them as job creators.
Right.
It's the top 10% who really hate the billionaires.
Which explains Donald Trump, right? The working
Totally.
class support for Trump, right?
I would just comment that what we saw in the 70s, I wasn't alive yet, I don't really know what happened, but if you're saying that there was like a massive split between the wealthy and the not wealthy, the poor, that was the direct result of Nixon closing the gold window, and that ever since then we've just been riding these fake bubbles. Even the stock market boom that we saw over the last 15 or so years was just because of the government bailouts in 2008, and the Greenspan practices following the tech bubble bust. So it's all state action. All turtles all the way down.
Okay, we have Ray here.
So the idea of social justice and innovation that you talked about happening, I think I was kind of trying to look at another way of looking at it as like the marketplace of ideas, and like power kind of got into it and saw that there's a way for a select group of people to feel even more powerful, because the idea of social justice had become mainstream to like middle class. So the upper class saw, well, this is getting boring and stale. So do you feel like that's another way of putting it? Like they're like, well, now they're kind of like on par with us. It's time to level up and get something that they don't understand, so that we can all be part of this new club, and we can keep people down for at least a couple more years until they catch up.
That is so well put. But something that I think maybe Curtis and I would disagree with, and will disagree with about, is the level of power that they actually have. I mean, I'm very skeptical about how much power they have. I think we're about to see, I think Americans are getting more conservative for the first time in my life in a way that I think is definitely consistent with like the moral principles that I hold, So I think the question is, how much power do they actually have? But I think the way that you just phrased it, that was perfect. Yeah.
They're getting more conservative in ways that are in line with your feelings?
Well, so the left, I think all of the, the racial justice stuff, up until, up through 2015, the fight for marriage equality, equality for women in the workplace, all of that stuff, the left was dragging the country in bending the moral arc of the universe towards justice for decades, and then everyone got there, and then they had to turn around and then they just sort of went into overdrive, exactly like you said, to create that new rarefied club. And they started saying, that's when they started taking things, I think, way too far beyond that moral center that we were sort of striving for.
But I do think this is a very reactionary time culturally. I think it could be ephemeral. I think it is ephemeral, but what I see is a lot of hysteria about drag queens. That's...
Oh yeah, you have this, yeah.
Well, no, it's not me, it's them. I mean, they've been talking about nothing but drag queens for about a year now. And that gays are groomers, and talking about being gay in a school is abominable, is the equivalent of pedophilia, and that's what I'm seeing. Aren't you?
No, I don't always approve of how they talk about
Twitter,
it, but...
you get a lot of information on there. You can go on. No, have you not seen this all over Twitter? I mean, this is...
I have, but I think they're reflecting an outrage in parents, which is like a sacred thing to protect. And I think that, like, I don't always approve of how they do it, but it's very funny, actually, because there's this... Have you guys been following what's going on in Dearborn?
Yes.
Yeah.
Some people won't know about this. It's very funny.
It's
Go ahead.
very funny. So Dearborn has the largest concentration of Muslim Americans. And they're very angry about all of the gay books in their kids' schools and their public schools. And so they've been joining with the Christians to oppose it. And so the woke left is having this breakdown because on the one hand, Muslims are like a protected minority that's like one of their special interest groups. On the other hand, they're siding with their enemies and saying, we don't want this book that teaches children how to give a hand job to another boy, like in our school. And so they're having, and it's so funny because it's like when push comes to shove, these woke people, the parents are showing up at the thing and they're like saying, we brought you here and now you're turning on us. It's like, it's hilarious. But I mean, don't they have the right to, again, it comes down to autonomy. Like what happens in your household, what happens in your community, these are like fundamental values, and they see in the drag queens like this representation of, that woke worldview that's imposing on them without their ability to say. I mean, yeah. I do think that there is a little bit of a, but also, now there's 25% of Gen Z identifies as non-binary.
I know.
Some point, it's
I know.
That's.
I've gotten reports from some elite prep schools that there is not a single girl who identifies as such in fancy preps, private schools, that every single former girl is now identifying as non-binary. Every girl. Yeah, it's amazing.
But is there an age under which you don't think a child should be at a drag show or reading a book about how a boy should give a boy a hand job, or no?
Do you? I don't know. What age would that be?
Well, I think a parent should decide, but
that was going to be my answer. I mean,
right. So,
sure.
but that's what the outrage is saying.
No, I am with you. Everything you just said, I agree with you. No. I think it's partly hysteria. I think it's partly homophobia, and I think it's partly absolutely legitimate reaction to being coerced and having their children coerced in ways that they don't want. And so I'm actually half sympathetic with it for sure. Yeah. All right. I was going to ask you something else, but I forgot what it was. Here we go, right here.
So I was interested in your comments about racism, and I think you're right, actually. I think there is an increase in some very ugly racism, and not just on Twitter, it's also in society. So I think that's correct. There's something else going on, though. I was in academia for many years, and one of the most interesting scientific questions out there is about the genetics of IQ. Okay. So, however, see you guys. So we need to call 911. We have a third rail on the state, the red line, a couple blocks. The third rail is the electrified rail you don't touch. And we all know, I did pharmacology research for many years. We all know you do not approach that issue. That is the end of your academic career if you look at that. There's actually a lot of data about genetics that could be applied to studying IQ. Okay, so that's one thing. Another thing are the current lawsuits at the University of North Carolina and at Harvard about some people call it reverse racism, whatever you're going to use. So that's another element. And then there is data about propensity to violence and environmental exposures, like lead and things like that, versus higher testosterone levels. We cannot, that is so far outside what academics can study. And I can tell you from talking to friends that are in pharmacology or neurophysiology, everybody knows that that's really, really interesting. And we can't study it.
Yeah.
So how do we move forward as a society if something that is so important can't be studied, and there are phenomena like the Harvard lawsuit that seem socially important also, and discrimination against blacks? I mean, what's the best way to teach someone that has this certain genetic pattern? We will never, until something changes, we cannot even approach these questions that would help people in our society that are, I think, being misserved in many ways.
I'm so
Good
glad
luck.
you asked that because I am so uncomfortable right now.
I'm not helping you at all. This is all.
That's very rare for me.
Good luck for you.
I think on the testosterone thing, I think we should be obviously studying that. It's extremely important, and it's devastating that there's just like a taboo on it. On race and IQ,
Wait a second. Which I think he was saying something else about testosterone. What was your thing about testosterone?
Testosterone levels vary genetically among people.
Right. You're saying that black people have higher testosterone levels?
Oh, is that what you were saying? I thought you meant between men and women. Okay, sorry.
Might be true.
Okay.
It might be true. It might be true.
Maybe that's. So
I don't know.
Asians do have lower
Uh-huh.
testosterone levels.
Yeah. So,
Okay,
Batya,
sorry,
would you like
I
to
thought-
comment on the testosterone levels of black men? Are you let's make it simple. Are you for or against?
I thought you meant testosterone, like between, like what like T does to a person, So, I am sorry. I think it's. I don't think we should be studying race and IQ. I think it's good that there's
Really?
a taboo on that. Yeah. I don't think people in Germany should walk around saying, let's find out if Jews actually have bigger noses. It's an interesting question.
Is there some history involved there? I don't know.
Exactly the same thing. Like, I just think it's not relevant, and I don't think IQ is a good measure of intelligence. But that doesn't matter. I could sit here and say, I've looked at the data, I don't find it compelling, but that's just a dodge. I have looked at the data, I don't find it compelling, but that's a dodge, because I'm just going to say the thing that I know is the most indefensible thing. I think studying that stuff is indefensible. I think, and I'm willing to say, I'm going to be the person who is, I'm going to say, yeah, in this case, not tarring an entire race as less intelligent is more important than intellectual curiosity, especially in this country, but in every country. I just feel like, yeah, that's the right.
Let me push back a little bit of that, because I actually didn't say race. What I said is genetics and genetic determinants of IQ or tendencies to violence. I didn't say race, and everyone automatically assumes.
Well done.
So why is it that everyone does that? And if we understood that better, could we help people? Could our society be less violent? Could people be more productive if we understood it? Why automatically do people
So
think
I
that's the
guess
racist
my
thing
answer to
look
that
at?
would be,
Well,
we
it's not
haven't
racist.
even tried the first thing, which is getting every kid to a place where they don't go to bed hungry.
It's not.
Why don't we start with that? And then once every kid has an equal access to the American dream, and then we've tried everything. There's no more violence in their neighborhoods. They're not growing up hearing gunshots outside their window every night when they're trying to sleep, which gives them a higher trauma response, which gives them less ability to sit still. Like, why don't we try all the things first, and then maybe I'll change my mind about studying that.
Well, what if we could discover something that would take someone who has genetically a propensity to have a lower IQ and raise their IQ by 30 or 40 points? You
Why is
think that would not
important
have...
though? Why is IQ important though? Isn't that almost like a racially charged term?
Well, I'm not.
I mean, a lot of people use it, but I use the ability to do certain things well, right? I mean,
sure, but then like, I would say you could probably want to like describe what IQ is, because are there considered to be lots of different types of intelligences too? So you're just like,
sure, yeah. I think that's all BS. There's G is highly predictive of competence across many areas. There are hundreds of high-quality articles that have been published about this, and it's just socially verboten to even talk about it. And maybe it's the most important issue in research right now. And no one would ever write a grant. I wouldn't even talk about this if I wasn't a former faculty member.
So
it destroys your career to even talk about it.
From turn of the 20th century through the 30s, many scientists, in fact, were arguing that, yes, in fact, some people are genetically predisposed to having lower IQs, right? And they should be treated accordingly socially, right? There should be different policies, programs to treat them differently, to help them, to raise up their IQ, to better fit them to society, to find the proper roles for them in society. And, get this, those people said this carries across races. They said that there are people who are white who have low IQ, genetically determined, low IQ. There are people who are Chinese who have low IQs, genetically determined. There are black, right? So those people weren't racist, but they were eugenicists.
Yes.
Right. So what you've been saying is eugenicism. That's what you're about, right?
I think understanding things is good, because as a pharmacologist, I can tell you we cannot have interventions that will improve things and make life better for people if we don't understand them. And this entire area is completely blocked from being studied.
Sure, yeah.
I think it's a problem.
Margaret Sanger and others said that the reason for poverty is that there are some people, and they were looking mostly at white people, by the way. The reason for poverty is that some people are born dumb, frankly. Yes.
Margaret Sanger led the most effective eugenics program, which is still in place.
Sure did.
The right to an abortion is basically a racist, as it's applied in the United States, is racist because it's disproportionately applied to people of color. And that's just a fact. You can look at the numbers on that.
So I have studied all this, and I am opposed to every aspect of it. But I will say that of what you've said, I'm opposed to every aspect of it. But I will say that I'm opposed to what you said even more strongly. I think we should absolutely study it, like we should study everything. As I said earlier, my number one principle is intellectualism, the love of ideas and curiosity and open inquiry. That's what I stand for. That's what these weekends are about. That's what Unregistered's about. And so, don't we want to study what is most scary, in fact?
I think we are a society that already puts way too much emphasis on IQ, like you were saying, sir. And I find that to be appalling. And
we can deconstruct everything, and I have.
How many people think he has a very high IQ?
I have all kinds of criticisms of the category of IQ and its uses and all that. Sure, of course, I'm not.
Thad, I'm very excited for this study on the size of Jewish noses that you're going to fund.
Wait, I knew you were gonna. Is this what you're worried about? You're worried about we're gonna find something out about you? Predisposed to financial acumen. Something like that. Is that true for you, or is it just some of your people?
If Kanye West said it, who are we to dispute it?
Right. Just for the record, I've told you this, but my grandfather's name was Noah Koenigsberg. He was a Chicago Jew, in fact, so I can say whatever I want, right? Or is it like I get quarter blamed? All right. Here.
Yeah, okay, so segueing off of that. I guess I'll try and button that up just a little bit, and I'll say, I guess it's a perfectly understandable position to be like, well, the risks of studying this outweigh that, and our society just isn't ready for it. I think that's at least an interesting line of thought. I would be curious to know what else our society might not be ready for in that way. That's so verboten. But my real question was just to notice, Thad asked, why do the liberal elites care so much about black and trans, and especially that intersection? And I just thought you had a great answer for it. It didn't come up in the talk, but it's like, again, it's that nostalgia of the mud. Like most black trans people are prostitutes, like street prostitutes. And so I think that
the vast majority of trans people who have been murdered, like 90+% are black trans sex workers.
Yes. And I think that's why I think some of that nostalgia for the mud is why that gets focused on. Where I'm sort of going with this with you personally is you called yourself a Marxist, and it seems like definitely those ideas appeal to our current like elite class. Maybe they don't practice them in the way that, you know, like they're not like true Marxists or something along those lines. But the other concept you discussed was that it seems to me, I don't know if you would agree, that they have lost their appetite for kind of revolutionary Marxism. And in that way, you could almost say that they have adopted some middle class values in themselves. If the middle class is anything, it is definitely not revolutionary. And so I wonder, A, do you think our current elite class is revolutionary? Maybe they're not Marxist, but do you think they're revolutionary in any way? They have that ethos? And then, as a Marxist, are you yourself a revolutionary?
Killer question. I love that question about the middle class, or the progressives, yeah.
I'm not, because the working class is not. Like, all they want is stability, and that's what I want for them. So I try sort of, I'm a bit of a I'm a populist, so I sort of, you know, try to keep my views, you know, relatively consistent with, you know, where
what if the working class wants a fascist dictator?
People ask me that all the time.
Which they have,
you know,
in the
like,
past.
what if they wanted this? What if they wanted that? You know, I feel extremely fortunate to have been born in this era, in this country. I probably wouldn't be a populist if I lived in Europe. I wouldn't be a populist if I was here 30 years ago. You know, it's like, it happens to be. I look at our nation.
If you lived in Europe, you'd be even more of a populist. Have you seen what's going on in Europe? I mean, what the globalists are doing to Europe.
I mean, I know, but there's so much baggage. I feel like, I don't know if I would.
Oh, I gotcha. Okay, I gotcha.
I don't know if I'd be able to.
Gotcha.
Different.
Gotcha. Okay.
So I'm not a revolutionary. I think they were very revolutionary when it comes to gender.
Oh.
They really want to do away with it. They want a real revolution on that front. You know, it's interesting that on gender they want to do away with the distinctions, and on race they want to rarefy them and solidify them, right? You're not allowed to be like Rachel Dolezal. You could have imagined very easily a world in which she was transracial, right? And that was something that was being celebrated. But no, you're not allowed to take on the marginalization in race. But the reason that there are no straight girls in elite schools anymore is because they need some form of marginalization to count, right, to get social status. So I think when it comes to gender, they're extremely revolutionary, but when it comes to economics, they're not at all, because they're more like the bourgeoisie, right, which were not revolutionary because, you know, they owned a lot of, you know, here today they own over 50% of GDP, is in the top 10% in that professional managerial class, as Michael Lind calls them. So I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, I think so. I could do maybe a quick follow-up there. It's like you also mentioned in your talk with Thad about how this like gender and race stuff is mostly just a distraction from the economics, which they're not revolutionary on. I think you kind of answered that bit. Do we think they're genuine? Like, do we think, are they, again, just to go back to the revolutionary thing, do we really want a revolution about gender? Or is this totally a facsimile or, totally a fake Fugazi, you know? And it's just like, we can ape the talking points, we can ape like a facade of a revolutionary aesthetic in gender and race, while really it's, you know, basically like, we're not actually interested in revolution anymore, and the real revolution would be economic, and we're just going to ignore it. Do we think they're kind of genuine? What I'm saying is, one of the other ways I could ask this question is, I know this isn't short, sorry. One of the other ways I could ask this question is, when at some point maybe gender and the race thing goes too far, we talked about like maybe there is like the start of like a race war happening, which I don't think would be ideal for them, for the elites that is. Do you think they would just move on to something else, or do you think they're actually adherent in their beliefs about race and gender?
I think they're genuine. I mean, I remember what it felt like to be woke. Like what it felt like was every breath I take is coming at the expense of a person of color, and I'm stealing from them. And I really believed it. And I think that, and the people I speak to, like, they really believe it. And
you felt guilty about your breath.
Everything, yeah. And which is like an insane thing to think, obviously. But so I do think they're genuine. And
it's empathic, though, which you started.
It is.
Discussion by emphasizing that you're kind or empathetic.
Mm-hmm.
So it seems to align
with my personality.
Can I let something slip there. You said you can't support populism in Europe, and I think I know why.
Yeah.
But can you say that?
It has to do with the nose.
Yes. You have a lovely nose. They don't like nice noses in Europe.
You get my meaning. No, it's
Because they're anti-Semitic? Is that what you're saying?
I know the names of my family, and they're soaked. The land is soaked in their blood. It's very hard to.
You're supporting populism in America now. I mean, your career kind of revolves around that right now, right?
Yeah.
But not in Europe, because the working class of Europe is not worthy of your.
More anti-Semitic.
Oh, but just because they're much more anti-Semitic?
Well, they are. I mean, we're extremely blessed. I don't know if people get this. Like,
yeah, they are.
It's just we live in a very blessed country where our working class doesn't hate Jews and they don't hate blacks and they don't hate Hispanics. But in Europe, it's blood and soil nationalism. It's just a different beast, and it's like when Jeremy Corbyn goes and addresses a group of working class British people. You know, they're sitting there with their ears like waiting to hear. Is he gonna see
the horn? You're doing a horns on the head. For those listening at home, horns on the head motion with your hands.
Like in Europe, when you say George Soros, you mean Jew. In America, when you say George Soros, you mean George Soros, who's doing bad things here. Like it just doesn't have that connotation.
Yeah.
So I don't know. Maybe that's
the working class of Europe is more anti-Semitic than the American working class. I think that's indisputable.
Oh, thank you.
Okay, but because of that, you wanna help and give more democracy to the American working class, but not to the European working class. Sounds to me like your commitment to democracy is limited.
I think I would have to be like full of like a lame kind of like self-hatred to advocate for people who hate me. I would never do that. I think that's really undignified.
Okay. I'm not opposed to that. I'm trying to get a sense of your principles and your values, right? So
it's undignified to advocate for people who hate you.
When the people hate you, you don't want to give them the vote.
No, I'm glad for them to have it.
Oh,
yeah.
But you don't want to help them vote. You don't want to like support them. You don't want to speak on their behalf like you're doing with the MAGA movement here.
I don't think my life would have taken that trajectory. I think my values would probably be very different.
But are you on the side of the EU and NATO and the globalists of Europe who are opposed to the populists?
No. But I don't. I think it's a false binary. It's like a false dichotomy. Yeah.
Okay.
I can be against NATO and the globalists, and without saying like that. I think that's the path my life would have taken if I was a European Jew. I think it would have been different.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Good. One more question for now. Right here, Tori.
Hey, I was just curious how kind of your experience from going from, it sounds like super like liberal left woke to now the MAGA Marxist, how that kind of transition went down, and how like I guess falling out of the graces of like, I mean I don't know, was there like levels of leftists that sort of like dropped you or was it only like a certain kind, I guess, because it's just
she gets a lot of hate.
It was all of them.
She gets a lot of hate.
I lost a lot of friends.
Yeah.
And it's shocking. Like you think you're done. You think like at every stage, like surely by now every friend who's stuck by me this long is not going to turn around and denounce me on Twitter. But no, there's always another one who's like, because it's so politically expedient to do that, you know, to betray a friend like on the left. Like it's the air they. And by the way, this isn't new to our generation of leftists. They've always been like that. Like they've always been like, you know, circling firing squad. You get social cachet by like who you can denounce. I mean, obviously, like that's sort of like the, you know, the thing about communism is, you know, the denouncing your friends.
My mother expelled her two best friends from her organization, from her socialist organization in the 70s. Yeah. And she rose up in the ranks too because of that. Of course. Then it was the International Socialists, post Yipsel, Young People's Socialist League, Shachtmanite, left Shachtmanite, Trotskyists, in Berkeley. All right, we are good for now. We're going to reconvene in what did I say? This is the Unregistered Podcast, and I'm Thaddeus Russell. To become a patron of the show and have access to bonus episodes, AMAs, and the unreported news analysis show, go to patreon.com/unregistered. Thanks for listening.